as I said, welcome to the this NNT presentation. If we can just knock on to the next slide, Mark, or can I do that? There we go. Thank you. Okay, excellent stuff. So. Basically, as I've already said, we hope we should be able to get through this. I think 35, 40 minutes in total. So grab a bag of popcorn and your 3D glasses and sit back and relax. We'll do all the hard work for you. One thing just to mention with this, in the run-up to this, the presentation or the webinar that we've positioned today was the title of the presentation was Governance, Risk and Compliance in 2016 with the latest threats for ransomware. In the lead up to this, all the questions we got and all the interest and all the excitement was more around ransomware. So we've decided that we definitely cover the GRC points. We'll go over that, but we're going to spin the agenda a little bit on its head, and we're going to spend everybody wanted to know about ransomware, so we're going to spend a little bit more time discussing that so that everybody's got the latest on that. So there's a scary slide coming up next, I think, so brace yourselves, everybody. There it is. So yes, so we've referred to, like I said, there's a great white paper that accompanies this presentation as well, but we refer to this as the great white shark of malware. And one of the reasons we do so is because we spend a lot of time presenting our solution to prospects, to updates to existing customers and partners, and inevitably at the moment somebody will ask about ransomware. Everybody's a bit freaked out by it, and there's a sort of direct correlation, we think, between that and this sort of slightly misplaced but nevertheless very, very understandable fear of shark attacks. And sort of the analogy being, and we'll go on and take a look at this in a little bit more detail later, is that you're far more likely to get nabbed by a crocodile or a snake, or elephants and hippos even are far more likely to get you than a great white shark. But frankly, the concept or the thought of being attacked by this fellow is enough to stop anybody going into the water for sure. But what we get the question, how do you protect against ransomware? That's something that comes up a lot, as I say. And the first thing that we really to sort of, I guess, footnote this entire presentation is forget about ransomware, because it's really, the answer to that question is, well, we do it the same way that we would protect against any form of malware. It's really no different, but the sort of consequences can appear vastly more scary. So if we just go to the next slide, please, Mark. So to kind of labour the point, the worst culprit of all is, and it's fairly prevalent right now with the Zika virus, is the mosquito. But nonetheless, the sort of fear and the concern that exists around ransomware, or the great white shark, if you like, is very much up there. And I think that there's a good reason for that. One of the things that we will highlight through this presentation is a really sort of is to kind of bring a degree of pragmatism to how you can stop ransomware. How do you stop ransomware? But don't think of it as ransomware. Just think of it as malware. Now, it's true that ransomware, there are certain discernible attributes, characteristics of ransomware which perhaps make the protecting against it somewhat more specific. But there's a degree of context which which absolutely needs to be sort of brought to bear. And I think one of the reasons why people are so frightened of ransomware is because compared to a regular breach is breach is scary, but with a breach you do get this sort of general kind of bleeding, this sort of ebbing away, if you like, of data. And I think if you do lose data, it really you're into the realms of, well, okay, how serious was that? Was it particularly sensitive? What is the ultimate effect of that likely to be? Whereas a ransomware attack is very much that immediate, it's instantaneous, and I think the fear of your systems, your IT systems being usurped, being apprehended and held to ransom is something which is terribly scary. So next slide, please, Mark. To put this into context, as you can see here, Q1 700. I mean, these are still big big numbers, but 750,000 new ransomware samples compared to 50 million new malware samples. So the conclusion is that you are far more likely to get hit by another form of malware, as we've seen already with likes of Home Depot and Target and the Verizon breach, etc., etc. But yeah, next slide, please, Mark. But nonetheless, it is scary, and I think because nobody wants to see this. This sort of one of the characteristics which defines ransomware compared to typical malware is this kind of hack for cash component, where you get this horrifying kind of crypto locker type announcement that basically tells you unless you hand over the cash, you're going to lose access to your files, all of your effectively all of your kind of computing resources. That's going to be out of reach forever, and it's enough to precipitate payment most of the time. So it lends itself to why not? The bad guys, they load up their email mailers every night, send out a few thousand of these, hope that somebody opens up the attachment or whatever it happens to be, and as soon as they do, of course, they get one of these very scary things. Typically the ransomware demands range from around $300 to $600, so not huge amounts, but there are lots and lots of them. And of course the worrying precedent we saw with the LA Presbyterian Hospital is that it's creeping into the world of the enterprise. And the other sort of scary part of it is that whilst the home user might be a more obvious, perhaps an easier point of attack, that very quickly ends up back within the enterprise, and so it's something that which is clearly relevant and of concern to everybody. So yeah, next slide, please, Mark. Oh, okay. Sorry. So this is where I hand over to you. So I apologise. I was gonna do a bit more of a lead up, but I'm going to hand over to Mark Kedgley, another Mark, who's going to sort of build up to the sort of the anatomy of these attacks and some of the things that we can do to better protect ourselves against them. And I think also we've got a live demo of our solution and how that works in context. So Mark, if you want to mute my line, and over to you.
Right, I'll the moment everyone's been waiting for to mute you. Right, well, thanks for that. Yeah, so as we've already sort of alluded to, ransomware is actually belongs to the sort of bigger family of malware, and this sort of indiscriminate nature that Marx talks about, the fact that it's a mass market cyber attack. The main vector for this is just scattergun emailing, and that's why I think ransomware has traditionally been targeted more at the home user. They're more vulnerable to this sort of attack because they don't benefit from the corporate cyber defences, and because they're likely to pay up. What's at stake is very dear to them: their personal photos, documents, music, and the sort of level of ransom that's set, I think, is also geared for that, because given only a short space of time to make that critical decision, being asked to pay up what isn't a life-breaking amount that's still painful, you can see it being a successful recipe. And that's why ransomware is mushrooming, doubling, sort of numbers are up double from this time last year. The way that it works, and rather than reinvent the wheel, I've lifted this slide from a McAfee presentation, is really like any other phishing attack, be it a sort of targeted spear phishing attack, which there's a suggestion that the Hollywood hospital that Mark was talking about may have been a more targeted attack, that sort of socially engineered attack. You know, if you want to attack a hospital, pretty easy to find out the domain name, pretty easy to find out the email formats and who works there, and then craft a targeted, suitably enticing email that they're going to click on, and if they do click on the wrong link or get the attachment, they're infected. And it's no different to any other sort of malware or phishing attack in that respect. What happens at that stage, and the sort of crucial thing to understand about this, is that there's a process that ensues which involves deriving a unique encryption key, a private key for that particular computer. Okay, so even if a ransom is paid from an individual for their computer, that key is not going to be effective as a decryption key for any other machine that's been encrypted by the same ransomware, even if it's on the same day in the same office. And that's why, you know, even though we've talked about this sort of $300, $600 ransom demand as a typical value, when you get into something like a hospital, you know, you assume that possibly more machines were infected, and the ransom demand was therefore much, much bigger, but it's on a per machine basis. Once that's there, there's a process that is carried out to discover documents and encrypt them, and only at that stage is the ransom demand made to say, right, we have taken control of your files, they're encrypted, and you're going to lose them forever if you don't pay this ransom within the 2 or 3 days that's on offer. And at that stage, they've got you. There's very few isolated instances where some of the AV manufacturers have provided defences and sort of back out from that. Kaspersky were able to get hold of keys for some of the ransomware packages, but they're only going to be effective in a very, very small number of cases. And really, once the infection is in place, the only way out of it is to either pay the ransom, but that's not a guaranteed way of resolving the problem. There's been lots of cases where the ransom's been paid, and that's the last anybody's heard of it. But really, to wipe the machine, re-image it, rebuild it, and recover documents that were otherwise lost from a backup. You know, backups are, you know, a crucial contingency for defending against a potential ransomware attack, because once you've been got, you definitely have been had. Okay, so what we really want to know is what we might be able to do about it. And again, because ransomware is a strain of malware, the same rules apply in defending against any cybersecurity attack. You know, we need layered security. We need to operate a full range of security best practices. And, you know, the common ones, you know, sort of intrusion protection, sandboxing, they're going to help to an extent against the ransomware that comes as an attachment. But of course, if it's a link, and if it's any sort of delayed action link, or, you know, even a sort of text-based batch file that doesn't look like any sort of executable or sort of active malware, there's numerous ways that those types of systems can be evaded. Of course, the main recipient and the main sort of target for malware is going to be, ironically, the sort of least well defended parts of our network. You know, anyone who's involved in something like PCI DSS, where it's very common to segregate the network. People will talk about, you know, what devices are in scope, and essentially anything that carries cardholder data, they're the things that you really take measures to protect and look after. So they go into their own secure zone, and they have everything thrown at them in terms of system integrity monitoring, in terms of system hardening. But anything outside of that isn't in scope, so the more sort of general purpose office worker workstations, they're sort of left with a lower level of security. Those people are going to be the ones most prone and most susceptible to a ransomware attacks. So the key thing here is that we need to have a bit of a step back and think more carefully about how we better protect the human beings in our network and how we better protect those workstation computers, and of course the applications on them, because a ransomware link or attachment is generally going to exploit a vulnerability in one of these desktop applications, so either the browser itself, in something like Acrobat Reader as an attachment, or one of the sort of Microsoft Office applications. The great thing is, and it's not that well understood, is that there are mitigation settings that can be enabled in all of those applications to better protect from the phishing attacks, from malware attachments. But you've got to know what you're doing, and it's a pretty expert area to get into. So for the more sort of security professionals on here, you're probably familiar with something like group policy within Microsoft. This is something that's got bigger and bigger over the last few years in terms of the resource that Microsoft use for controlling security settings and other configuration settings. I mean, if you look down this list, which is for Outlook 2013, there's a whole bunch of things which govern the operation, the function of Outlook. A lot of those are geared towards security, obviously, but there's also things like email formatting and whether you can select a signature or whether you're forced to use the corporate signature. In total, there's about 310 settings, something like that, which can be controlled. The difficulty is that although you can enable this and you can get sort of documentation from Microsoft which explains what these settings do, getting the right recipe of the settings to use for maximum impact is an expert job. And it's pretty easy to, for a lot of these settings, there's choices. So if you enable one setting, you shouldn't have another setting which clashes enabled. And unless you really know what you're doing, you're not going to get the maximum effect from this. Of course, it doesn't end then, because once you've done 300 settings in Outlook, you've then got to do Word and PowerPoint and Firefox or Internet Explorer, whatever the browser is used. And then you've got to then roll that out to all of the workstations and servers within the estate that need this level of protection applied to them. And even then, you've got to maintain that level of security. For a plain old workstation, you might have group policy refresh set every 30 minutes or so on, but it still might need a reboot for those settings to take effect. And of course, on a sort of continual operation server 24/7 business application, you're not going to have the opportunity to reboot that at any regular interval. So it's vital that you know whether you need to take action or not, because a lot of the time you don't want to be rebooting things unnecessarily. So taking all of those things into account, what we've come up with is what we're calling the Ransomware Mitigation Kit. This is essentially what you would want it to be. So it's the ability to first of all audit items within the estate in a passive way. So at this stage we're merely sort of inspecting the settings, how the device is configured, how the applications are configured, and reporting back to see whether there's vulnerabilities still in existence on the setup. At that stage, and anyone who's familiar with NNT, this is a slightly new departure or new extension. Given that knowledge that we have, we've been able to derive group policy templates, Puppet scripts. So if you're into Puppet or Chef when we get to the Unix world, because of course, although at this stage I'm talking about desktop applications, our main business is about operating systems and hardening those, so same rules apply to them. And then after that policy has been set, the really cool thing is that we've got this continuous tracking of the setup of the endpoint. So if there is any drift from that secure hardened configuration, we'll let you know. And of course we provide this system-wide file integrity monitoring, which means that if there's any breach activity, so even if despite our best efforts to protect the device there still is some suspicious activity, we will detect that and alert you to that And of course, that might be the difference between a machine being completely encrypted or an infection getting onto one machine and spreading to others. So speed of detection is absolutely crucial in any of these incidents, and that's exactly what we provide with our real-time detection. Leading on from this, I've already just touched on, although we're talking about desktop applications as a way of protecting and defending against a ransomware incursion, you're not going to want to stop just at protecting yourself from ransomware. You're going to want complete 360-degree protection from any cyber attack. So system hardening right from the operating system up through the applications is the way to go. If there aren't exploitable vulnerabilities in existence, then a lot harder for malware to find its way into the system, or for any sort of remote control or takeover of the machine. And that's precisely what we do. We're the great thing about NNT, we're one of a few CIS certified vendors. So if you're familiar with the Centre for Internet Security, they're an organisation that works with all of the main manufacturers and sort of academic institutions, experts in the field, to pull together, pool the knowledge that exists about vulnerabilities, about how to mitigate those vulnerabilities through secure configuration guidance. And the CIS are absolutely great at putting that information together. The great thing for us is that working with them, we can provide these automated checklists. So rather than working through a sort of printed checklist with audit advice and remediation advice, you just set our thing running, and within a couple of minutes it'll tell you exactly where you can improve security, how you can lock out ransomware and other malware from the system. But of course the great thing is that we encompass all of these other security best practices within this single package. So that closed loop of hardening a system, locking it down, checking for any changes, checking for any drift, and alerting you to breach activity, all under the banner of this automated change control process, gives you a really robust system for managing security best practices. And auditors love it. We work with auditors for all the standards, SOX and PCI and NERC-CIP and HIPAA increasingly, because there's the spotlight on health organisations, and more sort of European-based ISO 27K standards like that, as well as the sort of backbone, NISTs and STIGs in sort of military establishments. But the cool thing is that you take the same process for all of those. You load a report, you load a template into the change tracker system, and as long as it's got access to the endpoint, it can tell you how to securely configure the operating system and the applications. All right, so that was that was the theory, and hopefully that's given you a bit more reassurance that you can defend against ransomware, and you can work through it. I've got a couple of questions that have come through. I know we said we'd do questions at the end, but someone here is saying that they're well, it applies both ways. So if you are a customer of ours, someone's asking how do they get this ransomware mitigation kit, sort of what are the fees involved. If you are a customer, the great news is there is no fee for it, and we provide it just as a download. So just load the reports and templates into your change tracker system. The templates for Puppet or for group policy, we just provide those as a file set, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment, just so it's a little clear about what we're talking about. Somebody wants a free trial, which there's a questionnaire at the end, just I think 3 or 4 questions, so that we can get some feedback and improve future events. But if you then link on from that to the NNC website, you'll be able to request a trial, and we're happy to do that. We'll provide the software and a license, and even some help to get it set up and running, so you can see some really quick results and work out if it's going to be something that works for you in your environment. The final thing someone's asking about is just about slides being available. We're recording the event, so there'll be a recording for anyone who joined late or didn't get the audio. The white paper and supporting material come out. Mark says there's going to be a Q&A document as well, which is cool. So with all of that, I think what I'll do at this stage is if I now share my monitor. This is what we provide for not only ransomware mitigation but general compliance and security defences. We provide a view of changes. The product's called Change Tracker, as you can see there, with the kind of the starting point for this being that if things are secure and they're in a secure state, then if nothing changes on them, then we can rest assured that they're remaining in a secure and safe state. If there are any changes, then we need to work out whether they're going to weaken security, whether they're intended changes we wanted, or if potentially it's some sort of breach activity as a result of a hack or cyber attack. And that's the sort of in a nutshell, what we're aiming to do with Change Tracker. We use file integrity monitoring technology to sort of power the system, which means we've got a very forensic view of all system activity. And I'll give you an insight to that now. If we go to one of my devices on here, we provide a monitoring template. You can see the sort of things that we're monitoring. So it's things like registry keys, it's things like the installed software on the machine, of course the security policy, which I talked about earlier in terms of the sort of group policy and local security. And of course we focus on the overall file system to maintain or check that the integrity is being maintained of that, because if there is an infection of any sort or file activity, this will give us a tip-off. The great thing about this is that it all happens in real time, so as soon as there is a file system change, you'll get an alert straight away. And what an auditor's looking for and what a security best practice operator will be after is, you should have this calm, ideally. You should have systems in a hardened state where they're secure, and sure, changes are going to need to be made. They're going to need to be patched, applications will need to be updated and so on, but that's got to be done in a controlled manner. And if it is, then it's a lot easier to spot the unexpected, irregular sort of breach activity than the expected regular scheduled patching. So it's not easy, and it's particularly in a busy IT estate, maintaining security is hard. But if you've got tools like this to provide you the visibility of what's going on, it all becomes an awful lot easier. Now, this was billed as the sort of compliance compliance showcase. So I'm going to show you a couple of things on here. One is I'll go back to this device here. So I can show you the report. So this was one I ran on Outlook 2013 for this particular device, and as you see out of the box, it's quite revealing. We get a score of 4%. That means that out of the 30 or 40 odd rules that need to, in fact actually it's more than that, it's how many rules are there in this report? Yeah, it's more like 60 odd rules in there. Only about 2 have passed on that particular one. In fact, someone who's better at maths than me could probably work out. That probably means there are 50 rules, doesn't it? So it should have been, in fact there's 3 that's passed. So we've got that running, and what I've done, I won't do that now because, as you saw earlier, what I was actually planning to do for this demonstration was I've got a virtual machine environment here. So you can see this is the machine there, and I've prepared some snapshots on there, and if we had a bit more time, I've got snapshots for sort of pre and post hardening for that device. In practice, what happens is that after I've run that and the machine's rebooted because it's necessary for that group policy update, I end up with a 100% score. And the way that I got that, if you're interested from a point of view of actually putting this into practice. If I go back to actually log on to that machine, I'll just show you what we instigated, because from a point of view of remediation, I can just show you the steps that I took for that. And if you're an existing customer or thinking of getting into this area, it's pretty straightforward. What we provide on here. So this is the machine, and if I go here for the security policy on the machine, you can see how it's set up currently, but I showed you that screenshot earlier on where we had the group policy exposed and all of the settings that were in there. So down here, if we go into I was looking at PowerPoint earlier on, so you see I've got the full kit loaded up here. You see you get into this maze of settings that need to be set in order to guarantee hardening on this particular machine. Here's the Outlook one that I was working on. So again, for Exchange, there is secure comms and setup. There's a massive array of choices. But what we do with this mitigation kit is provide you with group policy files. So if you're familiar with group policy on Microsoft, it's just fast. You can import this into your domain controller, and I've got the ability using this local GPO program to run that policy update locally on my machine, and you'll see that what happens is that the policy gets deployed onto this machine. So it goes through and actively modifies this. Normally you don't see this because it's a group policy update, so it happens periodically. You can see here, because there's the difference between the machine and the user configuration settings. So interestingly enough, all of the way that the group policy enforcement is done is via the user settings. So you can see here there's a big slug of user policy settings for Outlook on the machine. And after that's done, it'll invite me to reboot the machine for that to take full effect. And you've seen that I did that earlier on, and that's how I got that report passing 100%. So trying to do it in real time, it's not particularly exciting because we've all got to sit there and watch a machine reboot. But some of the things I can show you in real time out of interest, just to sort of enforce this compliance element. If I go on here, on this particular machine, this was one I showed you earlier on where we've got the sort of system integrity monitoring in place. So if I go and make some changes on this device, if I jump into this particular location and paste some files in, because I'm monitoring the program file locations on this machine, and I'm looking out for any suspicious activity. So when I've got changes happening to executables or DLLs on the machine, those things will be fired through, and I'll get those changes reported. So you see there in background, because I had this screen refreshing every 10 seconds, I mean, the agent that we've got running on this particular computer literally does it in a millisecond by millisecond basis. So as changes are made and detected, the agent will pick those up, file those back. Now these could be patches, they could be ransomware files, it could be the stuff that gets on it and runs through the encryption of the files on the machine. So if I've got alerts like this, I'd want to jump on them. What I can do in this one's jokingly named Suspect TXE on here. I've obviously got a lot of information about the file system activity, so it tells me who made that change. It's really important because in terms of investigating this, 999 times out of 1,000, if not more, changes that are seen are going to be made by just somebody bypassing the change management process and jumping in too early. So if I know who's made that change within my team, I can tap them on the shoulder and find out if they're up to no good or not. You can see here it's recorded all of the attributes of the file, including the file hash. The file hash is important because any change, even at a binary level, that gets made to a file, so if it's a Trojan horse malware that impersonates an existing file, it can't do that without changing the hash of the file. So we make a particular dependency on that. If we see a file hash change, that's definitely a change that needs to be investigated. And in my particular system, I've got a manual lookup. We do a lot of work with automating this, so we work with threat intelligence feeds like VirusTotal, Kaspersky, and other centralized whitelist repositories, because what we're doing is that when we go looking for a file, what we're looking for is reassurance that, okay, I've seen this file change, this suspect exe emerge on this system. Was that part of a patching or update or intended update? Has anyone else seen this file? Is it a known system file? And by consulting with these sort of heavily subscribed whitelist repositories, I get a good steer as to whether it's more or less likely to be suspicious. Of course, what we do in our system is that where I see a file, so for example, this particular one is a good patch. I know that because this is the standard demo that we run. So I've got surety that this is a good file. Lots of people have flagged this up. In fact, it's a Microsoft patch. So even though we've renamed it for the purposes of the demo, I'll get some surety that it is a good file. It's an okay change. So what I can do with that particular one, and this is particularly relevant if you're getting into sort of mass system patching. This technology is great because it's allowed me to see changes as they happen and make that determination whether it's bad activity or good activity. Where it is good activity, the really cool thing I can do in this change tracker system is do what we call is create an intelligent plan change. Now, what that means is that I'm effectively teaching the system. I'm building my own whitelist repository, if you like. You know, we just looked at the Kaspersky setup, but I'm teaching the system that changes of this aspect on these type of systems in this time range are okay. I'm happy to let those go. And in fact, I can leave this plan change rule open-ended. What that would mean is that if I then saw a further recurrence of this file change on any machine fitting that profile, it will be waved through automatically as an approved plan change. And the great thing about that, if I just manually acknowledge that, is that even if I run, you know, hundreds of patches across thousands of machines, still the one suspect bit of activity will be flagged up. It'll stick out like a sore thumb because it'll be the one unapproved non-substantiated change on my system, and that could just be the difference between getting hit by a ransomware outbreak and not. Of course, for compliance, we do lots of things in terms of the compliance reporting that I showed you earlier on. So show an auditor that we're adhering to a hardened build standard. We've talked a lot about the desktop applications, but this is for the operating system itself. And again, as you might imagine, there are hundreds of settings that need to be enforced across the machine, right through from things like password and password complexity, so you know, minimum password length and so on. The great thing is we provide a lot of background on this. You don't need to be a security expert to understand why there's a vulnerability resulting from whatever the rule is checking. And the great thing is where we flag a non-compliance, we also provide remediation settings. So we'll tell you in this particular case, you know, it's something again that you set via the group policy on the machine. So you'd either remediate that through your own group policy, or if you're an NNT customer, import the remediated group policy settings and pass those out to your machine. So that's about it for today's session. You know, it was meant to be a quick, brief tour. It's meant to focus in on ransomware and the changes that were there. That's the change that I've just made in amongst some others when I did some patching. But you know, auditors love this because they can show that you've got a really tight grip on system integrity monitoring, security best practices, and that you should remain secure. No such thing as 100% security, and that's why we place as much emphasis on the sort of breach detection as the breach prevention within the product, because, you know, never say never. Plenty of better people than us have been fallen victim to a breach or hack in the past. The key thing is, are you going to be a target where it remains in place for weeks and weeks doing its damage, or will you find out about it within a couple of minutes of the hack happening? Okay, well, thanks very much for the time today. As I say, the session will be recorded and online later on. We'll be in touch via email, so we'll provide you with some links to that. But other than that, I think there's just a couple more questions before we finish up today. So I'll just fire those up. Someone's here saying, I'm a customer, can I get the ransomware mitigation kit, and is there a charge? Yeah, if you are a customer, you can get it straight away, and there isn't a charge because you're providing you're sort of on a maintenance program. This is all part and parcel of that. Will slides be available after the event? Yes, recording and the slides will be available. Here's an interesting one. Someone's also asking, how often do the mitigation kits get updated? Well, it's as often as they need to be. So, you know, as new vulnerabilities are reported and understood, you'll see that, you know, if it is a Microsoft application or operating system that has the vulnerability, they will move to provide patches. Sometimes, you know, that's a permanent remediation via a software patch, but with things like we're talking about through the security policy, the configuration-based vulnerabilities, that kind of is periodically, every time there's a new service pack or a new major release, then that security policy gets extended, and therefore the guidance that goes with that gets changed as well. But you know, we've got a rolling program to update the reports and remediation kits that go with them, so it never stops, really. Okay, well, thanks for your time, everybody. I think we'll close the session off. We said it would be about an hour, and we're just coming up to that. So thanks for your time. There's a questionnaire at the end, so if I could ask you to fill out any comments and feedback for that, that would be much appreciated, because we want to make these better as we continue to run them. And anyone who wants a more in-depth demo or a software trial, contact us via the website. We'll be glad to help you out with that. Otherwise, have a great day. Speak to you soon.